I'll never forget the smell that hit me when I walked into Riverside Nursing Home that cold February afternoon. It was a mixture of disinfectant, stale air, and something else I couldn't quite place. Something that made my stomach turn. I was there to visit my best friend Sarah, and what I found made me want to scream. The facility was on the outskirts of Chicago, one of those places that charge just enough to keep the state off their backs, but not enough to actually care for the residents. The hallways were dim, the paint was peeling, and I could hear someone crying from one of the rooms as I walked past. My heart was already racing before I even reached Sarah's room. When I pushed open the door, I froze. Sarah was lying in a narrow bed by the window, so thin I almost didn't recognize her. Her beautiful dark hair, the hair she used to spend an hour styling every morning, was matted and greasy against the pillow. The room smelled worse than the hallway. There was a tray of untouched food on the nightstand that looked like it had been sitting there for days. But what broke my heart was her eyes. She was awake. After 8 months in a coma, Sarah was awake, and she was staring at the ceiling with tears streaming down her face. "Sarah?" I whispered, rushing to her bedside. "Oh my God, Sarah, you're awake!" She turned her head slowly toward me, and I watched her try to form words. Her mouth moved, but only a small, strangled sound came out. The frustration in her eyes was devastating. I grabbed her hand, and she squeezed it weakly. "It's okay," I said, even though nothing was okay. "It's okay, I'm here now." That's when I noticed the wedding ring was gone from her finger. My blood went cold. I looked around the room for any sign of David, her husband. Where were the flowers, the cards, the photos of their daughter Emma that Sarah used to keep on her phone? "Where's David?" I asked, though I was starting to dread the answer. Sarah's face crumpled, and she shook her head. More tears fell. She lifted her hand and made a gesture, pointing to her ring finger, then making a cutting motion across her throat. Even without words, I understood. He left her. I felt rage like I'd never felt before. David Mitchell, the man Sarah had loved since college, the man she'd worked 60-hour weeks to support while he built his sales career, the man she'd given everything to, had abandoned her in this hellhole. I stormed out to the nurse's station. "How long has she been awake?" I demanded. The nurse, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, barely looked up from her computer. "Mrs. Mitchell? About 2 weeks, I think." 2 weeks? And nobody called her family? We called the number on file. The husband said he'd been informed. She shrugged, as if this was all perfectly normal. "And when was the last time he visited?" She checked her records. "Looks like not since December. He moved her here in October, and that was the last we saw of him." October. It was now February. Sarah had been lying in this room, awake and aware, for 2 weeks, and nobody cared enough to even brush her hair. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing Sarah's face, the confusion and heartbreak in her eyes. Sarah and I had been best friends since high school. We'd gone through everything together. She'd held my hand when my mom died. She'd helped me study to become a nurse. She'd been my maid of honor when I married Tom, and she'd been there again when we divorced 2 years later. I'd always thought David was the lucky one, getting to marry someone as kind and brilliant as Sarah. I remembered their wedding day 10 years ago. Sarah had been radiant in her simple white dress, and David had cried when she walked down the aisle. "I'm the luckiest man alive," he'd said in his vows. "I promise to love you in sickness and in health, for better or worse." Well, sickness had come, and apparently his promise meant nothing. The accident had happened last April. Sarah had been driving home from work, exhausted from tax season. She was an accountant at a mid-sized firm downtown, and April was always brutal for her. A delivery truck ran a red light and T-boned her car. The impact sent her into a coma with severe brain trauma. I'd visited her every week at Northwestern Memorial, the good hospital where she'd spent the first 6 months. David had been there in the beginning, sitting by her bed, holding her hand. But I'd noticed him getting more distant. He'd check his phone constantly. He'd step out to take calls. By month 4, he was only visiting twice a week. Then, in September, he stopped visiting altogether. I'd asked him about it once when I ran into him at the hospital cafeteria. "I can't do this anymore, Rebecca," he'd said, not even looking me in the eye. "The doctors say she might never wake up. I've got Emma to think about. I can't put my life on hold forever." "She's your wife," I'd said, barely able to contain my disgust. "She's gone, Rebecca. The Sarah we knew is gone. Even if she wakes up, she'll never be the same." He'd walked away before I could respond. In October, he'd had her transferred to Riverside. I'd been out of town visiting my sister and didn't know about the move until I got back. When I'd called him, he'd said it was more affordable and that his insurance wouldn't cover the expensive hospital anymore. That should have been my first clue that something was seriously wrong. Now, sitting in my apartment, I did what I should have done months ago. I started digging into David's life. It took me about 15 minutes on social media to find what I was looking for. There she was, Marcus Chen, 35 years old, marketing director at some tech company, and apparently David's new girlfriend. Her Instagram was full of photos from the last 3 months. David at fancy restaurants, David at a ski resort, David looking happier than I'd ever seen him, his arm around this perfectly put-together woman in designer clothes. The most recent photo, posted just 2 days ago, showed a diamond ring on Marcus's finger. The caption read, "She said yes, starting our forever. Number engaged, number blessed, number new beginnings." I felt sick. While Sarah was lying in that awful nursing home, unable to speak, unable to move properly, David was getting engaged to someone else. The divorce papers must have been filed while Sarah was still in the coma. I checked the public records the next day. Sure enough, David had divorced Sarah in November, claiming irreconcilable differences and citing the extraordinary medical expenses. The judge had granted it without Sarah ever having a chance to contest it. I made my decision that night. I was going to bring Sarah home. Tom thought I was crazy when I told him. We'd been divorced for 2 years, but were still close friends, and I'd called him to talk through my plan. "Rebecca, you're a nurse, not a full-time caretaker," he said gently. "Sarah needs round-the-clock care." "I am a nurse," I countered. "I work in rehab. This is literally what I do for a living. At a hospital, with a full staff and equipment. I'll figure it out." "What about your own life? Your job?" I didn't have a good answer for that, but I knew I couldn't leave Sarah in that place. "She would do the same for me," I said finally. Tom was quiet for a moment. "Yeah," he admitted, "she would." It took 2 weeks to get everything arranged. I used my savings to convert my spare bedroom into a proper care room. I bought a hospital bed, a wheelchair, physical therapy equipment. I talked to my boss at the hospital about reducing my hours so I could care for Sarah during the day. She was understanding, and more than that, she connected me with resources. Visiting physical therapists who could help, occupational therapists, speech therapists. The hardest part was convincing Sarah to come with me. When I told her my plan, she looked terrified. She shook her head violently, tears streaming down her face. She pointed at herself and then made a gesture like she was a burden, weighing something down. "You're not a burden," I said firmly. "You're my best friend, and I'm not leaving you here." She grabbed my hand and squeezed it with what little strength she had. Then she did something that made me cry. She took my hand and placed it over her heart, then placed her hand over mine. It was her way of saying thank you, the same gesture we'd used since we were teenagers when words weren't enough. I moved Sarah into my apartment in March, exactly 1 year after her accident. The first few weeks were the hardest thing I'd ever done. Sarah could barely move. She could make sounds but couldn't form words. She needed help with everything, and I mean everything. There were days when I was so exhausted I cried in the shower. There were nights when I wondered if Tom had been right, if I'd bitten off more than I could chew. But then there were the small victories. 3 weeks in, Sarah managed to lift a spoon to her mouth by herself. It took her 10 minutes, and most of the soup ended up on her shirt. But when she did it, she looked at me with such pride that I burst into tears. "You did it!" I cheered, and Sarah made a sound that was almost like a laugh. The physical therapist, a woman named Jennifer, came 3 times a week. She was tough but kind, pushing Sarah to work harder than Sarah thought she could. Speech therapy was even more frustrating for Sarah. I could see how much she wanted to talk, to tell me everything she was feeling. Sometimes, she'd get so frustrated she'd cry, and I'd hold her and tell her it was okay to take her time. During those long days, Sarah and I communicated in our own way. She learned to write letters on a board, slowly at first, then faster. That's how she told me about David. HELEFTME, WHENINE, EDEDHIM. She spelled out one night, tears running down her face. I know, sweetheart, I know. EMMA, she spelled. Emma, her daughter. That one broke my heart. I'm trying to find out where she is, I told her. David won't return my calls. Sarah's face crumpled. Her 8-year-old daughter, the light of her life, and she hadn't seen her in almost a year. I made it my mission to track down Emma. It took some detective work, but I finally found out that David and Marcus had moved to a townhouse in Lincoln Park, one of the most expensive neighborhoods in Chicago. Emma was enrolled in a private school nearby. I showed up at the school one afternoon and waited. When Emma came out, my heart nearly stopped. She looked so much like Sarah, with the same dark curly hair and big brown eyes. But she looked sad, walking with her head down, dragging her backpack. "Emma?" I called out gently. She looked up, and for a moment, she didn't recognize me. Then her eyes went wide. "Aunt Rebecca?" "Hey, sweetie." I knelt down to her level. "I've missed you." "I've missed you too." She threw her arms around me. "Where have you been? Daddy said you moved away." "Of course he did. I've been around, honey. I've actually been taking care of someone very special." "Who?" I took a deep breath. "Your mom." Emma went very still. "Mommy's in heaven," she said quietly. "Daddy told me she went to heaven after the accident." I felt rage boil up in me, but I kept my voice calm. "Your mom isn't in heaven, sweetheart. She's been very sick, but she's getting better. She's been asking about you." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "She's alive?" "Very much alive. And she would love to see you." That's when I heard David's voice behind me. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I stood up and turned to face him. He looked good, I had to admit. Expensive suit, new haircut, confident smile that disappeared when he saw me. Behind him was Marcus, looking concerned. "I'm talking to my goddaughter," I said calmly. "Something you should have been doing about her mother." "You need to leave," David said, his voice low and threatening. "Now." "Why?" "Because I might tell Emma the truth? That her mother isn't dead, that you abandoned her in a nursing home and lied to your daughter?" Marcus looked shocked. "David, what is she talking about?" "It's complicated," David started, but I cut him off. "It's actually very simple. His wife was in an accident. Instead of standing by her, he divorced her while she was in a coma, dumped her in the worst nursing facility in Chicago, and told everyone she was dead." That's not David's face was red now. Sarah was gone. The doctors said she'd never wake up. But she did wake up, didn't she? And you weren't there. Emma was crying now. "I want to see Mommy," she said. David grabbed Emma's hand. "Emma, it's not that simple. Your mother is very sick. She wouldn't want you to see her like this." "You don't speak for Sarah," I said. "Not anymore." I gave Emma a card with my phone number. "Call me anytime, sweetheart. Anytime you want to talk about your mom." David looked like he wanted to tear up the card, but there were too many people around. Instead, he pulled Emma away, shooting me a look that could kill. That night, Emma called. David was at some business dinner, and she was with a babysitter. "Is Mommy really alive?" she whispered into the phone. "Yes, baby, she really is." "Can I see her?" I looked over at Sarah, who was in her wheelchair doing her evening exercises. "Let me talk to your mom about it, okay? But soon, I promise." When I told Sarah that Emma knew the truth, she broke down completely. She cried for an hour straight, and I held her through all of it. Then she spelled out on her board, "NOTREADY, TOOUGLY. "You're beautiful," I told her. "And you're her mother. She doesn't care what you look like." But I understood. Sarah wanted to be strong for Emma, not the broken woman who could barely walk or talk, so we worked harder. The next few months were intense. Sarah pushed herself to her absolute limits. Jennifer, the physical therapist, was amazed at her progress. "I've never seen anyone work this hard," she told me. By summer, Sarah could walk with a walker. Her speech was still halting, but she could form short sentences. "Thank you," she told me one night, tears in her eyes, "for everything." "You'd do the same for me," I said. "The same thing I'd told Tom all those months ago." "No," Sarah said, shaking her head. "Couldn't. You're stronger." "You're the strongest person I know," I told her. Look at you. A year ago they said you'd never wake up. Now look at you. In August, almost a year and a half after the accident, Sarah was ready. We invited Emma over for a visit. David fought it, threatened to get lawyers involved, but Marcus, surprisingly, took our side. I'd been in touch with her, and she'd been horrified to learn the full truth of what David had done. Let Emma see her mother, Marcus had told David. I know because Emma told me later, or I walk. The day of the visit, Sarah was so nervous she could barely sit still. We'd gotten her hair professionally done. She was wearing a dress I'd bought her, and she looked beautiful. Still thin, still weak, but alive and present in a way she hadn't been in that nursing home. When Emma walked in and saw her mother, she froze. Sarah started crying immediately. "Mommy?" Emma whispered. "Hi, baby," Sarah managed to say. Emma ran into her arms, and they both sobbed. I stepped back to give them privacy, my own tears falling. This was what I'd been fighting for. This moment right here. Emma started visiting every week. David couldn't stop it. Not once Marcus put her foot down. Emma would tell Sarah about school, her friends, everything she'd been holding in for over a year. Sarah would listen, holding her daughter's hand, sometimes able to respond with a few words, sometimes just nodding and smiling. During one visit, Emma asked, "Are you and Daddy getting back together?" Sarah looked at me, then back at Emma. "No, sweetie, Daddy has new life." "With Marcus?" "Yes." "I don't like her," Emma said quietly. "She's nice, but she's not you." Sarah pulled Emma close. "It's okay to like her. She's not bad person." Even after everything David had done, Sarah was teaching Emma not to hate. That was who she was. Meanwhile, I was dealing with my own changes. I'd quit my full-time job at the hospital to care for Sarah, living off savings and the small amount I made from part-time consulting work. Tom had offered to help financially, bless him, but I'd refused. This was something I needed to do. But I'd be lying if I said it wasn't hard. Some days, I wondered what my life would have looked like if I hadn't taken this on. Would I have met someone? Would I have traveled like I'd always planned? Would I have more money? More freedom? Then Sarah would spell out LOVEYOU on her board, or Emma would hug me and call me her hero, and I knew I'd made the right choice. 2 years after the accident, Sarah was walking on her own, talking in full sentences, though still slowly. She'd started working with a career counselor, talking about what she might do now. Her old accounting job was out of the question, at least for now, but she'd discovered a passion for helping others going through similar situations. "I want to be counselor," she told me one night, "for brain injury patients." "You'd be amazing at that," I told her, "because I know the fear, the frustration, the feeling like you're useless. You were never useless." She smiled at me. "You're my person, Rebecca. You saved my life." That fall, Sarah started taking classes online to become a certified rehabilitation counselor. It was slow going, but she was determined. Emma was so proud of her mom, constantly bragging to anyone who would listen about how strong her mother was. Then, one Friday evening in October, everything came full circle. Sarah and I had gone out to dinner. It was a big deal because it was the first time Sarah had been comfortable enough to eat in public. We were at a nice Italian place in downtown Chicago, celebrating. Sarah had just gotten her certification and had landed her first client, another woman recovering from a traumatic brain injury. We were laughing about something, Sarah's speech now clear enough that people wouldn't necessarily know she'd been through such trauma, when I saw her face change. She was looking toward the entrance of the restaurant. I turned and saw David walking in with Marcus. They hadn't seen us yet. "You okay?" I asked Sarah. She nodded, but I could see her hands shaking slightly. "It's fine. I'm fine." I reached across the table and took her hand. "We can leave if you want." "No," she said firmly. "I'm not running anymore." They sat down at a table across the restaurant. Eventually, David looked up and saw us. I watched the color drain from his face. He said something to Marcus, who turned to look. Then, to my surprise, Marcus stood up and walked over to our table. "Sarah," she said quietly, "you look wonderful." "Thank you," Sarah said. There was an awkward pause. Then Marcus said, "I need to apologize. I didn't know the full story when I got involved with David. I thought, well, it doesn't matter what I thought. I should have asked more questions." "It's not your fault," Sarah said graciously. "Still, I'm sorry." Marcus looked back at David, who was staring at his menu like it was the most interesting thing in the world. "I hope you and Emma continue to build your relationship." "Me too," Sarah said. Marcus walked back to her table, said something to David, and then left. Just walked right out of the restaurant. David sat there for a moment, looking lost, then got up and followed her, but not before glancing one more time at Sarah. I could see something in his eyes, regret, maybe, or just the realization of what he'd lost. Later that night, Emma called, crying. "Daddy and Marcus had a big fight," she said. "She's moving out." "I'm sorry, honey," Sarah said into the phone, her speech now clear enough for phone conversations. She said, "Daddy lied to her about a lot of things. She found out he used your money to buy her engagement ring." My eyes widened. "What?" "Something about an account. She said it was fraud." It turned out that David had accessed Sarah's savings account during the divorce, claiming the money was a marital asset. He'd used that money, Sarah's money that she'd saved over years of hard work, to fund his new lifestyle with Marcus. When Marcus found out, she'd been furious. She'd thought David was successful and financially stable. Learning that he'd essentially stolen from his disabled wife was the last straw. Within a month, Marcus had broken off the engagement and moved out. David was alone, and from what Emma told us, he was struggling. His sales numbers were down at work, he'd lost Marcus, and he was realizing what he'd given up. One evening in November, 2 years after Sarah had moved in with me, there was a knock on my apartment door. I opened it to find David standing there, looking like he'd aged 10 years. "Is Sarah here?" he asked quietly. I didn't want to let him in, but Sarah had heard his voice. "It's okay," she called out. I led him to the living room where Sarah was sitting on the couch, a book in her lap. She'd started reading again, something that had taken months of therapy to relearn. David stared at her. You look like yourself again." "Took a while," Sarah said. He sat down, and I made myself scarce but stayed close enough to hear, just in case. "I'm sorry," David said. "I know that doesn't mean anything, but I'm sorry. I should have been there. I should have fought for you." "Yes," Sarah agreed. "You should have." "I was scared," he admitted. "The doctors said you might never wake up, and I panicked. I thought I was being practical, protecting Emma from seeing you like that. I told myself I was doing the right thing." "You were protecting yourself," Sarah said. He nodded, tears in his eyes. "Yeah, I was, and I lost everything. I lost you. I'm losing Emma. I lost Marcus. All because I was too much of a coward to stand by you when you needed me most. I needed you," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "And you left me in that horrible place." "I know. God, Sarah, I know. If I could go back and change everything, I would. But you can't." "No, I can't." He wiped his eyes. "Can you ever forgive me?" Sarah was quiet for a long time. "Maybe, someday, but not today. And we're never getting back together. I know. I have a good life now. Rebecca saved me. Emma loves me. I'm helping other people. I don't need you anymore." David nodded, standing up. "You deserve better than I ever gave you. You always did." He looked at me in the doorway. "Thank you for being there when I wasn't." I didn't respond. He didn't deserve my words. After he left, Sarah came to me and hugged me tight. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for saving me, for showing me what real friendship is." "Always," I told her. "I'll always be here." 3 years after the accident, Sarah moved into her own apartment. It was bittersweet for me. I'd gotten used to having her around, but she needed her independence. Emma spent weekends with her, and they'd built a beautiful mother-daughter relationship. Sarah's work as a rehabilitation counselor was taking off. She had a gift for it, understanding her clients in a way no one else could. She'd look them in the eye and say, "I know you feel hopeless right now, but I woke up from a coma, couldn't walk or talk, and was abandoned in a nursing home. Look at me now. If I can do it, so can you." As for me, I went back to working full-time at the hospital, but I'd changed. Those 2 years caring for Sarah had taught me what I was capable of. I'd also discovered that I didn't need a romantic relationship to feel complete. I had Sarah, I had Emma, I had a career I loved. Tom and I had dinner one night, about 3.5 years after I'd brought Sarah home. "I'm proud of you," he said. "What you did for Sarah, it was incredible. I just did what anyone would do for their best friend." "No," he corrected me. "Most people wouldn't have done that. You gave up years of your life, your savings, your career advancement. You sacrificed everything for her." "It wasn't a sacrifice," I said. "It was love." Last year, Sarah met someone. His name is James, and he's a physical therapist who works with stroke patients. He'd heard Sarah speak at a conference and had asked her out for coffee. She'd been terrified, convinced that no one would want to be with someone who still had limitations, who sometimes struggled with her words when she was tired. But James saw her for who she really was: strong, resilient, beautiful inside and out. They got married last spring in a small ceremony. Emma was the flower girl, beaming with pride. I was Sarah's maid of honor, just as she'd been mine all those years ago. During her vows, Sarah said something that made everyone cry. "James, you see me for who I am now, not who I used to be, but I need to thank the person who made it possible for me to stand here today." She turned to me. "Rebecca, you gave me my life back when everyone else had given up. You showed me what unconditional love looks like. You're not just my best friend. You're my sister, my hero, my guardian angel." I was sobbing. Emma was sobbing. Even James was tearing up. As for David, I heard through Emma that he'd moved to Denver for work. He sees Emma a few times a year, and according to Emma, he's in therapy, trying to deal with the guilt of what he did. Sarah has forgiven him, more for her own peace of mind than for his sake. "Holding on to anger was making me sick," she explained to me once. "I had to let it go. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean what he did was okay. It just means I'm not letting it control my life anymore." Now, 5 years after that terrible day when I found Sarah in that nursing home, I look at everything we've built together and I'm in awe. Sarah has her own thriving practice, helping dozens of people rebuild their lives after brain injuries. Emma is a confident teenager who knows what it means to be resilient, who watched her mother overcome the impossible. And me? I learned that sometimes the most important thing you can do is show up. Stand by the people you love when everyone else walks away. Choose compassion over convenience. Choose love over fear. Did you like this story? What city are you listening from? I'd love to hear from you in the comments. If this story touched your heart, please consider leaving a super thanks so I can keep bringing you more true stories about resilience, friendship, and the power of never giving up on the people we love. Thank you for your support, and I'll see you in the next story, with love and respect.